Welcome to the OCLC workshop titled Ditch the Sticky Notes, Learn How to Manage Borrowing and Lending Off-System Requests in WorldShare ILL in Tipasa at the 21st Annual Northwest Interlibrary Loan and Resource Sharing Conference. NWILL's land acknowledgement is read at the opening and closing sessions. So to view NWILL's land acknowledgement statement, please visit our website, nwill.org, under the land acknowledgement tab. If you would like to read it in full, I'm actually dropping it into the Zoom chat because we are set up as a Zoom meeting and not in standard webinar format. Most of our communications for this session are taking place in Zoom versus Whova. This is an exception for this only. As every time I go to do something, my computer wants to change the setting on me.
All right, we see the link in the chat. Very good.
Yep. Today's date is Friday, September 9th, 2022. Our session is being presented by Stacy Bruner and Elena Miller from OCLC. My name is Miriam Wanick, and I'm the convener for this session. This session is being recorded with permission from our presenters, and because they retain the copyright to the information they are presenting, they may choose to request its removal from public viewing in the future by written request to the NWILL committee chairperson. However, at this time, it is planned that recordings will be made available once captions have been added. Attendees will be notified when recordings are available. To turn live captioning on, click the CC link at the bottom of the screen and select Show Subtitle. If you have a question during the session, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will post these to the presenters at the end of their presentation. They also have the ability to see these.
Hey, Miriam, would that actually be the chat in Zoom? Because I don't know that the Q&A is enabled. So I think
that's correct.
The chat window.
In our case, it's going to be the chat window.
Yeah.
I also have the ability to see things in Whova if things do end up there.
Perfect.
When the presentation ends, please complete the post-session survey in Whova, but I will also put the link in the chat here and in Whova, and it's also located on our conference homepage. We really love getting that feedback. It just is a way to make us better. On that note, I will turn the session over to our presenters, and wish us luck, because this is the only thing that we're doing in a meeting format. Please make sure, also make sure mics are off and your video off. Video can be on, but mics are off, and the more videos that are on is more bandwidth, and it might be harder for other people to hear and view.
Right. Thanks, Miriam.
Yeah.
As we, Stacy and I envisioned this workshop, if you want to jump in with a question, at certain points we'll pause for questions. You can feel free to turn your camera on or your mic on to ask your question. But yeah, I think, like you suggested, probably generally good to keep the bandwidth down by keeping most cameras off. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our workshop, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Those of us on the East Coast, it's already getting late in the day on a Friday, so I'm going to hope to try to keep my energy level up today, and I'm sure Stacy as well. And we are going to talk today about off-system requesting and some new features that recently became available for WorldShare ILL and Tipasa. And I know we have some folks that use ILLiad here today too, and that's great. We're going to generally talk about off-system requesting, and later on we'll talk about specifically the new functionality for us so everyone can see it if they haven't tried it out yet. And this is Stacy and me. You can probably see us. I just left the slide in case someone wanted to look at the slides independently so they could see who the presenters were. So my name is Elena Miller. And I'm pleased to be back this year with another workshop topic at Northwest ILL. And today, as you know, I'm joined by Stacy. Hi, want to say hi, Stacy?
Sure. And I'm Stacy Bruner, also a product manager at OCLC and resource sharing. And I don't think Alina and I have presented a workshop together. It's usually Jenny and or Tony. But yeah, so yeah, excited to
Yep.
be here.
All right. So for today, as I'm going through the agenda, feel free to drop a note to us in the chat. Let us know where you're attending from today, and I'll just kind of get started. Our session, as you, I'm sure, noticed, is about ditching the sticky notes. And so if you've been using sticky notes or something similar, other kinds of paper or a spreadsheet to track requests that aren't easy to run through the system, we're hoping that you will no longer have to be able to do that or have to do that. So our goal for the session is to explain and talk about, just discuss what off-system requesting is, and then how you can use the new features if your system is WorldShare ILL or Tipasa. We're hoping that it'll be fun and interactive. So we already started asking for you guys for some real life examples out in Whova. And so I've kind of inserted some of those into our slides already. And we'll, leave some, we'll pause for a little bit to let you guys, throw in some additional examples or tell us an interesting story from your library about some of these kind of different and strange requests that you might get and who you've had to get them from. We'll have, we have a decent amount of slides planned, but I think we'll have a lot of time at the end for open discussion if you just want to talk about the topic in general, or have ideas of how we could improve on this initial set of functionality. As Miriam said, the session's set up so you can turn on your mics and cameras. So if there's anything that you'd like us to stop and clarify, please do feel free to interject. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about, what is off-system requesting? What's it used for, what it is and what it isn't. And I think that often it's easiest to begin with asking ourselves a few questions. So do you ever need to borrow from or lend to libraries that aren't on the OCLC network, or maybe don't even have an ILL system at all? I think we all know of small libraries or other organizations in which their ILL volume just wouldn't be enough to justify an ILL subscription. So, but they might be the only place that you could actually obtain an item, that your patron's asking for. So when you do borrow or lend outside of your ILL system, it can be sort of a pain. And we are always interested to hear, how do you keep track of those requests? And if it's a physical item, how do you make sure that it gets returned? And so before we get into actually like the new way that you can do this in WorldShare ILL or Tipasa, we thought it might be kind of fun to share examples from some of your past requests you've needed to do off system. And I think some of these do get quite interesting. So some of you gave us some examples out in Whova, and thank you very much. And like I said, if you have some additional examples, please go ahead and put them, you type them up in the chat. We're going to pause here and kind of just talk about some of the examples that we got already, some of the examples we've heard previously. But when we think about borrowing, how did you discover where the item was held? Who was the partner that you needed to get it from? And we're using this term partner in our new functionality because it's not always a library. It can be any sort of organization that has an ILL request. How far did the item come? Where did you have to get it? Did it have to come from really far away? And did you, what methods do you have to reach those people? I assume it's phone or fax or email. Maybe something comes in snail mail occasionally. And I think usually things are quite out of the ordinary, or they're quite historical and old, or maybe something that wasn't well documented at the time. And so, that usually comes into play. And then, I think sometimes it might take a long time to receive the item. So what was involved there? So if you have any stories around this, I see someone already popped one into the chat. Feel free to turn on your camera or mic and chime in and tell your story about some sort of borrowing request.
Yeah, so we actually had gotten an email from a library, and they wanted to borrow a dissertation from us. And so we had to figure out how to do an off-system request real quick to figure out how to do that, to lend it to them.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think small medical or small like a local law firm, smaller medical libraries or hospitals, and those sorts of things. And I think, when it comes to medicine, sometimes they need things kind of quickly. So that kind of flies in the face of sort of off-system requesting, taking more time or more effort.
We also have an example that was put in Whova, doing non-OCLC libraries as a whole.
Mhm.
We often, from us here at Vanderbilt, sometimes we have to do that for especially international lends
Right.
and borrowing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the network is not quite as extensive outside the US, so you'll often, an international library would probably approach you off system. Yeah, and thank you for your example from Relay, and I know ILLIAD also has some capabilities for handling off-system requesting. And so we're really glad when we were able to add some of these capabilities into WorldShare ILL and Tipasa. So even though you've had some tools for these things, they're probably still taking more time than your average request. And so it's that's kind of why we wanted to do a workshop on it.
Yeah, the sticky note example was from a real library that we talked to, a Tipasa library, and she said, well, I just put the sticky note on my monitor, and so it'll be there if I hear from it or, there's an update.
Yep.
Like,
See,
wow,
Chris,
wouldn't you just like to put those sticky notes right into the system?
I see a new example from Chris. These are the interesting examples that I wanted to elicit. The scans of the witch trial transcripts from the 1600s. And I loved, thank you to the person that put in Whova about they needed a recording of a 1946 boxing match. Stacy and I were wondering what format that arrived in. Yeah. So if you're here today, let us know. And yes, in Canada, off-system requesting is really big. Thank you, Luke, for adding that in there.
We've got Clio in here as well as ILLIAD and Relay systems that folks are using.
Right. All right, so let's wrap up getting sort of our borrowing examples in here, and we'll move on to lending. I know a lot of the examples will be similar there. I don't want to take too long on a Friday afternoon, but I do want to hear everybody's stories because these are really interesting to us. Since, we are not in the library every day, we don't hear all the stories. So for lending, if we're ready to move on, and we don't have to move on, you can keep putting your borrowing stories in the chat. But, if you think about sort of flip it around and think about the things that you have to lend, again, I think it's, you know, you're probably lending to small institutions, you know, they might be a medical office, a law practice, and they are, you might get things in by an ALA form. So you might get that faxed to you or mailed to you. You might get a phone call from somebody that needs something. So they don't have an OCLC ILL subscription, but they, you know, need this item for whatever, for their business purposes or for someone that works for them. And so generally, yeah, it's going to be things that are hard to find. And we had one comment in Whova, and I was glad to see that because it made me think about, so if you're a lender and you don't have an OCLC subscription, you still want to be able to lend from your collection. And so Stacy might be able to address that anymore, or more than I can, but you are, you know, it is possible for you to expose your collection in WorldCat, but then not participate in ILL. And so I guess from a borrowing perspective, you might need to do an off-system borrow to one of these institutions that is perfectly willing to lend from their collection. They just don't have the volume to justify their ILL subscription. So again, some of the questions I had here were, you know, who is it that you're needing to request? Who is requesting from you? How did they get a hold of you? Was it for something kind of rare? Maybe not. Maybe it was something uniquely held by your library. You know, and was it some sort of, was there urgency to the request? And I'm thinking of like medical libraries or hospitals at that point. And then when you are asked to lend off system, we were curious if you tend to charge or if you tend to just use whatever your normal policy is. So
Pam has her hand raised.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just going to say, we had earlier this year, we had a researcher from Oxford University email us to say that he wanted one of our theses that was done at Boise State, but it was old enough where it hadn't been digitized. So he wanted to know if we could get him a digital copy of that. So we did it all by email, and we ended up getting it to him through email, but then Oxford paid us with IFLA vouchers. So it was quite an adventure, but it was fine.
Oh yeah, IFLA vouchers. That's something else we could put on our slides here. You'll notice that I have some empty boxes. So if we do this presentation again, I'll be able to fill out the boxes with some of the things that you guys mentioned today.
And Cassie mentioned about where you're finding suppliers who aren't supplying on the WorldShare ILL network, but they do have cataloging holdings visible, and she's sounds like she's gotten some requests from those folks.
Yeah. On one of the slides I had, yeah, OCLC non-supplier, thinking as a borrower, when you come in, you found the item on WorldCat, but then they're non-supplier. So that, yeah, that's the case we were thinking about, that you need to find a way to get that request to them. So any other, any good lending stories anybody wants to share? I'm just reading the chat.
Melissa has her hand raised.
Sorry, I can't see the
That's
hands, so
okay.
you'll just have to jump in.
It's not really a good story, but there's a particular law firm in Atlanta that likes to come to us to borrow books, and they're willing to pay for FedEx shipping to them and back off their account. And we're happy to supply it at no charge. They come to us because we won't charge them. and we'll send it out within 24 hours. And we don't care that they're a law firm versus an academic library. We want the statistics. So what I did was I invented a symbol for them that's basically an acronym of the law firm name. And that way I can track an ILLiad when I do work with them for my director. And it's worked out. We have not had a lost book so far, but then I've only lent to them maybe 5 times in 20 years. So, you know, take the reassurance with a grain of salt.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good example, even though it's like, yeah, there's an opportunity there. Maybe you could maybe get a little money out of them, but that's not really necessarily your goal. So yeah, I think these are kind of very typical uses and typical times when you do get asked to go to do things off the system. All right, anything, Stacy, anything else you wanted to chime in with, or anybody else have
I don't have anything.
examples to share? Because if not, we'll just keep moving. I've got a few more slides and then I will be passing over to Stacy. So a related topic really is the frequency in which you have to do these. Like I've said a couple of times, they do take longer than your normal request. So we were curious how often you need to do these things. And everybody at OCLC that I shared this with, we looked at and we were like, wow, people are on the one end of the spectrum or the other. So I just wondered if anybody could kind of let us know, chime in and tell us kind of why you maybe don't need to do too many, because you can see here a lot of people only are doing 0 to 2 in a month. But then we've got, you know, several people that responded to our Whova poll that they're doing more than 20 in a month. And so we'd love to hear kind of a few examples of, you know, that are on the low end, but then also some that are on the high end as well.
So I will speak up. And again, when I know it says NWILL, but Miriam Wanick at Vanderbilt. And I think when we're somewhere in like the 11 to 20 range, even though I didn't answer this in time for you to get it on the slide. Sorry, been a little busy.
Well, I took these screenshots this morning, so I know that a few more
Yeah.
people did chime in since then.
But part of that for us is because we're borrowing things internationally. And
Okay.
we're trying to get something from a small Italian library or we like had to go, they are not even in OCLC. They're not in WorldCat at all. We just had to go to the National Library Catalog and hunt down like some resource that we know about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Luke points out that non-US libraries really need off-system requests. I think that, you know, because WorldShare ILL and ILLiad have been around for 42, 43 years now, you know, we have lots and lots of libraries have WorldShare ILL or can act on the WorldShare ILL network. And so it's pretty easy to find at least US-based materials here. But yeah, outside of the US, if you want things that are native to your own country, it's a little harder to get those.
Yeah, and I love Cassie made a good point. Like people would have different tolerances or different goals for doing off-system requesting, and so you kind of have to do that balance. Like, how hard am I going to search for this thing in, you know, try to find it in WorldCat versus, you know, if you do think it's available off-system, factoring in that extra time it's going to take to manage that request. So
yeah, and even more than just willingness to do the work. I mean, there's staffing levels and budget and, you know, other duties that you have within your library, other responsibilities. So yeah.
You may have to
Very much.
focus on the ones you can get done quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other, Miriam, those are really good examples of, you know, you do have to do a lot of maybe getting things outside of the US. Are there other people here that answer on the high end of this question and why you tend to do maybe more than other libraries? Of course, the folks in Canada, yes. So just so you know, I saw Susan's comment. I don't know who answered what, so it's anonymous. So if you answered wrong, that's fine. Okay. All right, well, as we go, just feel free to jump in. Maybe you'll think of a story, or maybe you'll think of a situation, or, you know, a question for other folks on the line about how they've done certain things for off-system requesting. Oh, I forgot I had one more slide, and we've already kind of talked about most of this, but just thinking more around the process. So not actually the item you're borrowing or lending, but just kind of the things that you do. And I think we've heard examples already, or we've seen in the Whova chat, like spreadsheets or Google Sheets being used to track them. So I would assume it'd be the people on the that are doing more than a couple of months for sure. You're probably going to start to have a spreadsheet. And then the ways that they come in, or the ways that you submit them, right? So you might use phone, fax, email. I did see in Whova that somebody did was keeping, maybe that wasn't today, maybe that was in the past, or maybe it was still today, keeping files of these. And I loved the image, or they mentioned that they are printing out the ALA requests on orange paper so that you can see those separate from other requests, so that they stand out. So yeah, all these triggers that, you know, that falls into the bucket of sticky notes, at least in what we were thinking about when we titled this session. And then the other, some of the other systems that let you sort of manually create a request in your system, and maybe even what I called a mock account here, that they, you know, so maybe you create an account that you use for off-system lending. It's not quite the same as a normal patron of your library. Okay. Okay, so now we're gonna like transition a little bit into the WorldShare ILL and Tipasa functionality. And I know not everybody's using those systems as their primary system, but you know, hopefully you'll still find our explanations and later when Stacy shows some examples, that those will be interesting to you to kind of see how it works, and maybe it'll even trigger some ideas. Some of the benefits, or there's kind of two key benefits, right? One is that because we now have a way to track these, you can do that all in your WorldShare ILL or Tipasa staff interface. And then the other benefit is that because these things have a fulfillment type, then in your statistics, you can see these as, so one, they're included, right? In the past, if you didn't run them through the system, they wouldn't have been included. And now you can identify them. So you can tell how many borrowing or lending that you've done. So as the borrower, you're going to manage the requesting and receiving and returning of the materials with the off-system lenders. And sort of similarly as the lender, you can manage the reviewing, responding, sending, and returning of those materials. And within the staff interface, You can use the email functionality, so you can easily email with off-system partners about these requests. You can record pieces or entire communications related to the requests by using the staff notes function. And then basically, and Stacy will show more of this, you're going to manually update this request as it goes through. So you control what status you leave this request in, so that when you go back to check on it, you'll be able to see how far it went in the process or what the next steps might be. And then finally, by having this integrated or having this functionality in the system, you can deliver your articles or receive articles with Article Exchange. And then, as I mentioned, you would be able to tell at the end of the month how much of this stuff you did by looking at your OCLC statistics. So I thought I would just give you a quick look at the interface. So in WorldShare ILL or Tipasa, you now have, or you do, everyone now has an off-system requests queue. And if you've not used it before, when you open that queue, you're just going to see the Create Lending Request button. The sub-queues for borrowing requests and lending requests, they'll show up as soon as you have a request in that queue. And so to create a borrowing request, you probably will start, well, you will have to start with an ILL request. And there's a way to change the fulfillment type now to an off-system request. And Stacy will show you more slides on that. And then the lending queue will show up once you use this Create Lending Request button for the first time and actually have something in your queue. I will just mention here that WorldShare ILL and Tipasa look virtually the same on the screen. The only difference is that for Tipasa, you're going to have over here on the right, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, you'll have your tags. So Tipasa users are used to seeing tags in their queues, so they are included here. And the lending and the borrowing queues are similar. They have the same sorts of information. So I only showed the borrowing one because they're so similar. And then when you go into one of these requests, so you open up the request details, you're going to notice that at first it looks pretty much like any other ILL request. However, there are a few differences on the screen. You will see, probably the first thing you'll notice is there's a button here at the top about changing the request status, and that's how you'll move it through the workflow. Then you'll also notice that the fulfillment type is listed as off-system, and you're given some fields to include information about the potential lender. And then finally, there's a summary of like the significant dates and details about the request over at the right. And then in terms of your tools, you're probably already familiar with where these are located, but you're going to take advantage of your notes or note button, and that lets you add staff notes to the requests, which are accessible over here under the staff notes. And then you're also going to take advantage of the email button, and that for WorldShare ILL, you only have one template, and that is the full request details. So when you click email, it's just going to pull in all the request details as a starting place for the email you might want to send off to the requester, or the potential lender. And you can also use that email button to touch base with the person requesting the item so that you can send them updates periodically. And okay, so any questions? This is a little early to start asking questions because we haven't actually shown it, but anything that I talked about that could use some clarification?
Hi, this is Cassie Franks. I had a question about stats. You mentioned that they would be available for off-system requesting. The only place I've seen them is in the borrower transaction level detail report showing OFSYS as the lender symbol.
Yeah.
Is that where to find them? Is that the spot?
Yes,
Okay.
and you said borrowing, there's a lending like a full details of lending requests as well, where they would
Okay.
show up.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Great question. And Stacy does have a screenshot of that later in the presentation. If people don't know yet what we're talking about, we'll be sure to share that. Okay, yeah, great question. And again, I can't see if anybody's put their hands up, so oops, sorry, I
didn't see any
advanced the slide
hands.
before I was was ready. Okay. All right, so before I pass over to Stacy, I just thought it would be a good time to bring in an idea of kind of what off-system requesting is and what it isn't. So we've talked a lot about these libraries that don't have an ILL system. And so sort of in the broader picture of resource sharing, off-system requesting is appropriate for, again, those organizations that don't have an ILL system, so they don't have an OCLC ILL subscription. And it's for this like one-on-one or one-off kind of borrowing and lending. So, and again, we'll talk about this a little bit more later and kind of give a better picture of how this fits into, again, a bigger picture of how systems interoperate. But if an off-system partner that you're working with does have an ILL system, so say they're just not on the same system as you, and you need to do some transferring or some, passing between the systems, there are other options, and one of those is ISO 18626. So, and Stacy is much more knowledgeable on that technology than I am, but we do encourage you that if you know of situations where you do need to be passing things between systems, please do reach out to us at our team mailbox there, OCLC resource sharing at oclc.org, and we will figure out if an ISO solution is appropriate. So anything you wanted to add, Stacy?
I'll just say we don't mean to use weird lingo, but ISO 18626, it is and you basically described it, but it's a protocol that just describes a basic workflow for a loan and for a copy, so that systems know exactly how to talk to and understand one another. Can you fill this request? Yes, I can. No, I can't. And so that each system then can take in those messages and process it through the workflows that are proprietary to each of us. So that's just a little bit about that.
Okay, great. Yes, and there are systems set up using ISO today, and the protocol has changed over time, so it can be a little bit confusing. So usually we end up, the best thing is having a one-on-one conversation that's specific to your library, so we can see where everything is at for those systems. I did see questions from Luke, and maybe Cassie answered it. And we can talk about this if you want to hold that question too. Talk about it later.
When we get to statistics, I can. Yeah, I think we mentioned about, and there was some conversation in the chat about using a symbol for an off-system supplier for a partner that you've made up, for example, just so you sort of know them by a symbol, or maybe it's the symbol that they're known by in their own country, like Canadian, the Libraries and Archives Canada issues symbols to their libraries. And we may add that functionality. We're looking at how we can do that so that it will display instead of the off-sys. So you see everybody has the same symbol. That was sort of a quick way to get the functionality out there so that we have a way to identify those and they can sort of live amongst other real requests. But we are looking at how we can show the symbol that you know them by. So among all your off-system requests, you can see which ones are, your local public library or the law office or the hospital or the Sorbonne, etc.
So that's coming. I don't know where it is on the roadmap, but that's
Later,
future functionality, right?
2023.
Yeah, we know that's needed, so that'll be in the next, probably the next round of enhancements. Okay, and I think Erica's question maybe will get answered in Stacy's section.
Yeah, I don't see Erica's question.
Question. Oh. I'm not sure what WSM. It's. I'm sorry that you don't see that. But Erica, if we don't answer your question, let us know and we will circle back.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'm going to hand over to you, Stacy. And do I have to stop sharing or can you steal the sharing from me? I'll stop.
Yeah, let me see. I can
And
share with the same screen show.
And I just want to clarify in the chat, they said WSM.
Okay.
I knew this from a while ago. WorldShare
It's WMS, and that's why I was wondering if that was
WMS, okay.
transposed. Okay, yes. So I think Stacey's going to show when we get to like this how-to section is perfect. So that was kind of a good transition question, Erica.
And we have more question stopping points. All right, I'll get started then with borrowing. So let's say you had a request land in your new for review queue because automation didn't find any lenders for it. And I know all of you are using automation on your new borrowing requests, right? Just a little plug for automation there. Best way to find lenders and get requests filled fast. So let's say you get one that doesn't have lenders and you look yourself, you go to discover items, you look for holdings, and you're still coming up empty. So, or maybe you have a request that went to a few lenders and for whatever reason, they were not able to supply it. Maybe it was checked out among all of those lenders. And it happens. Sometimes you have to go looking elsewhere. I've lost my mouse. So now you're scouring the internet and some online library catalogs that you know about that you think might have it, and you find the item. So you email to ask if they'll loan it or send a scan, and they respond positively. So now you can change the fulfillment type to off-system request. This puts the request into a different workflow, one that's more one-sided than what you normally do with a WorldShare ILL or Tipasa request. And you'll actually play the role of both borrower and lender with this request. When you change the fulfillment type, you'll be prompted to add some information about the supplier. Their name and a need before date are all that's needed to get this started. If the lender has a symbol, like I said, an OCLC symbol, but maybe they're a non-supplier, or a national symbol that you know them by within their country, you can add that along with an email address by which you'll correspond with the partner about the request. So the starting status will be submitted for the request. You can apply borrowing constant data and fill in your shipping address and cost limits. Now, in order for this to truly be submitted, you do have to notify the supplier yourself. You can use the full request details email notification to start your message. So I do want to note that this template includes lots of information from the request. So you'll want to remove anything that's private patron data or might just be confusing to the partner. But it's a good way to just pull in some of that data that you do want to send to the partner. The request will now live in the off-system requests borrowing sub-queue. And if you before were only seeing the create lending request button here, you'll now see the borrowing sub-queue show up. So you can find this request here when you hear back from the supplier, or if the item just happens to arrive in your mail room. If you don't know when it's shipped, or maybe you forget to make that update, you can skip that status and mark the item received. If you do mark the request shipped, you can include the ship date or the supplier's request identifier if they happen to send that, and the due date. Due date is required at this point, at least for now. We're considering an enhancement request to hold off on the due date until the item is received, because you may not know the due date until it arrives with the item and the paperwork. Staff notes can be used to track emails sent to and from the supplier of the request. So Tipasa libraries can, and WorldShare ILL libraries can send email notifications. WorldShare ILL doesn't keep track of what you've sent. Tipasa does, but emails that come to you would come to your direct email address. So you might want to copy and paste the details of those into a staff note. Here's an example where I've added the content of an email from the supplier that had some useful information about the request. And remember too that these staff notes are searchable. If the request was a copy and you received the document by email as say a PDF, you can upload the document to Article Exchange and mark it as received. WorldShare ILL libraries can find the Article Exchange URL and password in the full request details, shown here on the left, in order to share the document with your patron. We'll add the email docs to patron button in a future release. I realized when I was putting this presentation together that it didn't make the initial release of this functionality. And of course, Tipasa libraries, you have a template available called Article, available in Article Exchange that you can use to notify your patron. And again, the Tipasa notification will appear after some time in the notification history for the request. So this tip actually applies to both borrowing and lending requests. So for borrowing requests, if you happen to know why a request was unfilled based on the supplier's response, you can add a reason for no. This might be helpful in reviewing statistics later on. For example, if the Sorbonne always wants to charge more than you care to pay, you may want to try to find some other suppliers of those French art journals that you're always trying to get. On the lending side, you might charge more than the requesting partner is willing to pay, so you'll mark those requests with the reason cost exceeds limit, and you'll be able to see those in statistics. But we'll talk more on lending after a pause for questions about borrowing. I put my chat window away, but it says 3.
Oh, I put my chat window away too. I was going to say too, I'd love to hear if anybody has done a borrowing request, how Stacy just showed it, using this either WorldShare ILL or Tipasa. I think there's a few of you out there.
Luke mentions in the chat that they created custom notifications for all of the different borrowing and lending actions, which is easier than using the full request details, which is very true for Tipasa if you're doing very many of these or you want to standardize so your staff don't have to think about the message they're drafting every time they have one of these. That's a great way for Tipasa libraries to do it. WorldShare ILL doesn't have email templates, but you might have a shared drive or someplace that you have access to those, the content of those messages that you would just copy and paste. But again, I've mentioned the full request details because it does pull the data in that you need from the request. So to tell the partner, we're looking for the item with this title, this ISBN, etc.
Cassie has a good tip in the chat that these off-system requests don't expire if they pass their need before date. So that's a good thing to know. You don't have to worry about.
That is a good one. And we're looking to improve that so that they will expire. It was a quick get the functionality out the door, but they may be sitting in that off system queue expired and you've still got the request open with your off system partner. And it would I would think it would be the courteous thing to send them an email if you either maybe you haven't heard back from them and it's past the expiration date that the patron gave you, and tell them that you no longer need the item.
Oh, right. If I'd read the entire thing, she was saying you have to watch your queue
Mhm.
for now.
And I think it should be straightforward. You do just have to remember to go into that queue, but I'm pretty sure that the due date appears. I'd have to go back and look at one of my screenshots, but the due date appears so that you can sort by that and see what's expiring.
Right.
Not due date, need before date.
Mm-hmm.
Due date's applicable when they go overdue. I'll throw this question out for the rest of the audience. Where do you look for books, or maybe articles too, if you can't find them in WorldCat? That's a question better answered by the audience, I think. I think Sue, if your status is mom supplier, but I think you mean non-supplier. I got confused because when we test requests, my other colleague and I always put in that we heard about the item from your mom. So that's another question I think that other folks could answer better than I could. Why would a non-supplying library respond to an off-system request? I think it's because they don't generally want to participate, but they're willing once in a while to entertain a unique request or something that maybe only they can uniquely fill.
And I'll speak up on that one because, again, we reach out to a lot of non-supplying libraries at Vanderbilt, and part of that is they may be non-supplier, but they're non-supplier because they maybe don't have the staff or the management system to handle a lot of requests, or they just don't have their institution is set up not to send out their stuff because they've been told they're not supposed to, but maybe they'll make an exception as a one-off. They just don't have the ability to send it all out all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think someone gave us an example in Whova that they're requesting on the WorldShare network would not be high enough to justify a subscription for them, but that they did realize that they have a unique collection and still would like to provide items from their collection if people really need them. So.
Mm-hmm.
Stacy and Alina, I just want to make sure that these questions don't get buried. There are a couple questions in here from Erica. Under the off-system requests, will borrowing only appear if we place a request?
Yes, if you have an active off-system request in any status, but it is off-system, that it will appear in that queue. So those sub-queues, the borrowing and lending sub-queues under off-system, they show everything in every status. So they don't have the sub-queues like some of the other queues do. I think that gets to what the question's asking.
Thank you. And there's one more that I see. Is there an address book of sorts for your off-system lenders, or do you always have to manually enter the name or code or email when making borrowing requests?
I have a slide about that a little bit later. So there is, for Tipasa libraries, you can use contacts today, but we are adding the ability for WorldShare ILL and Tipasa libraries to keep track of partners so that you don't have to type in every field about the partner every time.
Thank you.
All right, last call for questions about borrowing.
Sue asked a question, Cece, if your ILL request comes back unfilled, can you go right into off-system request, like a re-request? So
Mhm.
if it's unfilled, do they have the option to still to switch the fulfillment type?
Yes. Yes, from unfilled, you can change the fulfillment type and try a supplier. And actually, interestingly, I didn't include this, but you can keep trying off-system suppliers. So if you you tried the available suppliers, say in Italy, on the WorldShare ILL network, and now you found a couple more on the internet maybe, and you can try one and then the other, and you would just replace the partner information and maybe keep some notes in staff notes for yourself about who you're trying next. Okay, let's chat about lending. So if you receive an email or a phone call from another library, a local historical society, or a hospital in your area asking you to supply an item that you hold, you can track this as an off-system lending request. For example, so there are a few benefits to tracking this in the system. You'll be able to process the lending request along with all of your other requests. So when your student worker goes to retrieve items from the shelves and package for shipping, this item will be processed right along with the others. And if the local hospital calls while you're out of the office on a glorious vacation and wants to know when their item will ship or what the tracking number is, your staff can look up the request and provide them an update. To create an off-system request, you navigate to the off-system request queue. So this is a bit different from a new borrowing request. You may know that there's a blank request form under the borrowing request today, but I think most folks start looking for the item under Discover Items. But for a lending off-system request, you'll always start in the off-system request queue. So let's first enter what we know about the item and the requesting organization. The lending request form provides fields at the top for basic information you may already know about the request, the requester, and the item. Only borrower name and need before date are required. More information is always useful for finding a request later, including details in an email or for statistics. You can make use of lending constant data to add cost and your return shipping information. But you don't need to enter all the information about the item. In fact, less information is better. If the requesting library has sent you an identifier like an ISBN, ISSN, or an OCLC number, you can enter that, or a title for searching will suffice. You may need to change the sort order or limit by format type in advanced search to find the specific item you hold. But when you see the green checkbox and a held by my library message, you'll know you've got the right item. Click Apply Data to Request New or a numbered request if you've actually already saved it to apply the bibliographic details from the OCLC record to your request. So now you'll be returned to the request and it's automatically saved. The fields that were updated from the bibliographic record will briefly appear green, so you know what changed. This is a good time to gather the call number and add this to the local ID field for retrieval. And then this local ID field will appear on the printouts. And in order to include this item with other lending for retrieval, packaging, shipping, or scanning, you can add it to a print queue. When your lending staff print everything from the queue, they'll have this off-system request as well. When the item's packaged and on its way, you can update the request to shipped. If you have not already applied with constant data or otherwise, you can add the due date and the return address. But don't worry, if you forget to do this, a helpful error message will let you know which required fields are missing at this point. So you may not touch or even think about this request again until the item is returned when it arrives back in your mailroom. Since the receiving institution is not using the same system, you won't know the item is received unless they happen to email or call with an update. Maybe they send an email and say, thanks, we got your item and we see the due date and we will return it on time. But odds are they'll deliver the material to their patron and they won't let you know that it arrived. They'll just get it back and send it back to you when it's due. So off-system requests are designed so that you can skip statuses and add information where it's known or leave it blank, like a received date. You can skip this status and simply mark returned or checked in. And I think that brings us to another pause for questions before we talk about some statistics a little more.
I see no action in the chat, so looks like we got nothing for right now.
We'll forge ahead.
Yeah, I think, just that quick sort of run through there, Stacy. The lending side is less complicated, so maybe we won't get as many questions. And it's pretty similar. Same tools that you use when you're doing a borrowing request.
True.
Except for the looking up the item.
All right. So let's talk statistics. So while we call these off system and they appear in their own queues, they're not completely out of sight and out of mind. You'll be able to get to these requests when you need to find them. They'll appear alongside regular requests in your search results and in statistics. If you do a search by title or patron name or something else within WorldShare ILL or Tipasa, you'll see off-system requests alongside other borrowing and lending requests. So I've pointed one out here. We don't actually show the symbol on this search results page, but that is one that we were tracking as an off-system request. As a Tipasa library, you can also apply and search by tags. So you may find it useful to tag these requests like you do others. One example may be an invoice tag, where you would use this to generate and follow up on invoices to libraries who can't pay by IFM or maybe have promised an IFLA voucher. And also, because these requests are standardized with that off-sys symbol, you can do a search by borrower or lender symbol to find just off-system requests. So this might be useful when looking at recently closed requests, for example. And certainly, as we talked about, being able to track by a unique symbol for each partner, we do hope to add that in the future so that you can track that symbol. In fact, we provide a place for you to put that now, even though we don't yet have the capability to search by that. All your off-system requests will be available in usage statistics. An example of lending requests shown in your lender resource sharing stats report is shown here. You'll recognize the off-system request by the off-sys in detailed statistics. Remember that Tipasa libraries can also query by these requests when using analytics, so you can do any sorts of special reports that you want. So there you might create a monthly or an annual report to see a summary of all of the requests that you've done, quote unquote, off system, maybe as evidence to your upper management of what kind of work that you've been doing to support other libraries and organizations, maybe in your local area. All right, so we've tried to keep things pretty non-specific so far between WorldShare ILL and Tipasa because they're very similar. But I did want to touch on a few things that are extra useful for Tipasa libraries. So any tags that you're using on regular requests, and I think I've said this maybe twice already, so tags can be used on off-system requests. It's a great way to lump them together in search results or to serve as a special quote unquote queue for things like invoicing or follow up by a staff member. I've shown how WorldShare ILL libraries can use the full request details to populate an email with request data and pare it down to what's relevant. Tipasa libraries have access to the same template, but as Luke pointed out, you can use your Tipasa notifications or create custom notifications that are used only for off-system requesting with your partners. And these templates then would include the fields that are relevant to the recipient. We recommend, as Luke did, to have separate templates for each of the major actions. So request, cancel, shipped, unfilled, received, returned, etc. Because this makes them more easily identifiable in notification history as well. But do remember that none of the notifications are automated yet for off-system requests. So you'll want to be sure to send notifications to the partner and the patron for borrowing requests as the request moves through the workflow. Your Tipasa patrons may not see any evidence of the miracle that you've just enacted to get them their item. It will look like any other request to them. They'll be able to see the status change as the request progresses through the workflow. And when you upload the article to Article Exchange, they'll retrieve it from their My Account view. And we touched on this briefly, but Tipasa libraries also have access to a contact email address for use on the email notifications. This was functionality that we built with fulfillment from the branches, from the library's own branches in mind. But consider that you have, you could save the email for, say, the National Diet Library in Japan, if you're frequently borrowing materials from their collection. And that way, it's always available. You don't have to remember the address, and it's available for all of your staff since it's stored in the system. You can type in or select from one of your contacts the email address that you'll send the notification to, and then the sent email appears in the notification section of request history on the request. But I will say, don't go crazy entering doing the data entry for all of your contacts right now, because we have partner records coming in October, and they'll be separate from the contact records, and you'll want to save the partner records because they'll have more information than just the email address. But I will pause talking about future enhancements because that's my next section after a pause for questions.
We do have one here from John. Since OCLC RS underlies ILLIAD, can lending requests show up in ILLIAD?
No. So if you had created a lending request in WorldShare ILL, I don't think that the request manager, or sorry, the connection manager in ILLIAD picks that one up. It does ignore it because it is a different fulfillment type. But ILLIAD has capability to store these within ILLIAD, is that true? I know it does for borrowing.
Yeah, we'll let our ILLIAD users that are here today answer that question. I think from some of the comments that the answer is yes, but I don't want to speak since I don't use that functionality. Don't want to confirm, I guess. And that was, I think, the only question.
Okay.
Tipasa, anybody here that is using Tipasa, our next community meeting, I think we'll probably put some tips and things for off-system requesting. That'll probably be a good topic for us to have. So if you do have questions about that, reach out to us, or like I said, since we have like a probably we'll have another community meeting here in the next few months. We'll try to remember to put some stuff about off system there. But I think Stacy gave a nice overview of kind of just those kind of little extras you get with Tipasa.
Yeah. All right, so I sprinkled in some enhancements and bug fixes that we want to do in the future, but here's a quick summary. So so remember that Alina said that off-system requests are for requests with an institution, a library or something else that does not have an ILL system. So as we consider enhancements to off-system requesting, we're always weighing against how much time it saves our own users in WorldShare ILL and Tipasa versus whether it's really serving as a substitute where system-to-system integration would benefit your library and potentially lots of libraries across the WorldShare ILL network. So, and for that purpose, we've implemented the current version of the ISO ILL protocol for peer-to-peer requesting between ILL systems. And we're open to working with other vendors to establish a workflow between our applications. So with ISO requests, we can include these partners in a lender string and provide full automation of the workflow. So to be able to send them a request that they'll see in their own system and then to manage the whole workflow back and forth. But these are some of the enhancements that we're going to make to off-system requests because we do see it being really beneficial, as mentioned here in non-US locations, but also like Cassie mentioned, like not having to come back in and make sure that dates aren't passing without emails going out to certain folks participating in the request. So I mentioned that partner records are coming in October, and this will allow you to save a name, address, contact information for the partners that you borrow from and lend to. This will save having to type that information into each request that you place with the partner. And I think this gets really, really helpful when you have multiple staff doing this, so you can distribute some of this workload so that things can be done right away. Like, oh, if it's a Japanese language article, like that's the partner that we use. Let's just always email them when something goes unfilled. And we'll be adding automation of overdue notifications as a matter of convenience and cost control. I think if you aren't sending overdue notices, it's very easy for the patron, the partner library to forget that that's due back to you. So that's a peace of mind for all parties involved when we're able to do that. And there's some other improvements recommended by users, like populating the to email address when opening a previously sent notification from history. So this is within Tipasa. And I think that was something that we missed with that or didn't think about doing when we initially implemented the notification history early in Tipasa development. And so it makes sense to remedy that now. And users have also told us that they sometimes mark a borrowing request shipped because they received an email that it's on the way, but they don't know what the due date is until the item arrives with the paperwork. And also then we'll combine the last steps in the borrowing workflow to return and complete a request, since it's quite unlikely that you're going to hear back from the lender regarding receipt of the materials. So it just makes sense to complete the transaction at that point. And I can keep going with the slides.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I was going to ask you to do that. Let me turn my camera back on if I remember how to do this. Okay, there we go.
And I will advance for you.
Okay, great. So we're kind of wrapping up with what of course, now I don't see my speaker notes. Lucky you, I'll be more brief that way. So just wanted to wrap up with, kind of summarizing what we talked about today and just, tell you how to get some assistance if you start using this functionality and you have some questions. So Stacy, so what we talked about today, I'll just kind of summarize what Stacy and I talked about. And then maybe these slides will also kind of be useful if you want to print these out to kind of trigger you if you're not doing off-system requesting all that often. There is, sorry, I'm sure you guys see this little orb going over me. I have a bird feeder outside that has a glass thing on it, and as it rotates, it's going. So sorry about that. If it's annoying,
It's
I'll
been
turn
very
my camera
entertaining
off.
the whole
Has it
time.
been doing it the whole time? I just noticed. I thought the sun shifted. Okay, so apologies, everybody. Tony always makes fun of me when I have that happening, but I like my bird feeder. Okay, so well, as we talked about, and these aren't necessarily sequential, so I know there's a tendency we want to be able to be like, you know, first you do this, then you do this, but it, as you know, off-system requests don't necessarily follow a 1, 2, 3, 4 pattern. So one of the things, you know, to initiate this, you're going to first convert your ILL request to an off-system request, and you're going to need to manually email the off-system potential lender, because that is not automated at this point. You will then manually update the request status as it moves through your fulfillment process. And then you would use your staff notes and your email tools to take notes that get saved with the request, and then update your user. And if you need to reach back out to the lender or whatever, but that email tool is really important. And we've said a bunch of times, use statistics to track how much of this that you're doing. And then for the lending side, kind of similar. And to create one of these, you use that create lending request button. And you're going to add in whatever you know about that item at the time you create it. And you're going to want to add probably details from the partner that however you got that request in, whether it was the fax form or email. And then you're going to go through your normal retrieval, packaging, and shipping process, or scanning if it's an electronic item. And then you're going to do just like you did for borrowing, requests. You're going to need to update the status manually. You're going to want to save your staff notes. You're going to want to use email to communicate about that request. And then at the end of the month, you can check your statistics. And I think I put a slide like this in every presentation that I do, just to remind people, don't forget that there's all kinds of documentation and training available on this topic and everything else for all of the systems. Help.oclc.org, I think, was the first URL that I memorized when I started working at OCLC, because I had to learn all of this stuff. And there's a short URL if that's easier, oc.lc/help. And notice that there's a contact OCLC support link right up there at the top right of that page up there on the header. So anytime that if you don't already have OCLC support on speed dial and you need to look up the phone number, you can check there, or just Google it. It comes up fast in Google. And the nice thing is with search, because there's not other things called in our search system like off system, if you just put in off system, you're going to get right to the resource sharing documentation. You don't have to like wade through the different products. Okay, and I guess that is all we had planned for today. So we'd love for folks to hang around and ask further questions, or if you have enhancement capabilities, if you've done a few of these and you want to tell us what your experience was like, that would be great. And I will just sort of, if you do want to take off right now, thank you very much for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And for those of you that want to stay around, you can unmute yourself and turn your cameras on, and we'll just have open discussion. I think if we stop sharing the slides, will we get more of a yes, more of a room experience? Great.
And I just want to say that I have dropped the post-session survey in the chat. It really helps us out if you folks could click on that and fill it out. Thank you so much for Alina and Stacy, your time and especially your specific questions. I know that when I'm using it and I look at documentation and I say, yes, but I have a special case, I have a special question. So that really helps us out when you do that. So thank you for this workshop. And yeah, please, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat and we can talk about them. There is one I see in the Whova chat, or rather the Whova Q&A. It says, is there a way to send someone an overdue notice without an email address?
If you have a mailing address, you could mail it to them. But if they, I mean, being off system, they're not in the same system. That's one of the things about WorldShare ILL is that you know that the lender is using a system and that they'll see those in a different queue, and they do keep an eye on those to look for requests that are overdue so they can contact their patrons.
Thank you. And that's all the questions I see in Whova, and I don't see any in Zoom, but we're happy to take more.
I just want to unmute for a moment and ask if you would like the Q&A to be recorded or not. Elena,
Elena's
you are muted.
I know. That was one of my questions I was going to ask you yesterday. I was like, I think it's fine to record unless people want us to stop, but we can certainly stop the recording.
Because then it can open up.
Yeah,
discussion.
it's up to you. I know generally with our OCLC events, we stop recording before the discussion session, and
Yeah.
we should have thought of that, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording so that
Sounds
the
good.
discussion can open up. People can put on cameras and everything else and not feel like they're going to end up on the wide
Yes.
internet here.
Yes. Okay, great.